Get your gear ready. This is a Sherpa's Guide to Innovation. This is a Sherpa's Guide to Innovation, a podcast dedicated to guiding you along your innovation expedition. Sherpa host Ben Tingy at your service. Here at the Innovation Engine, we are big fans of Reid Hoffman's Masters of Scale podcast, aren't we, Jay?
That we are, Ben.
And if you're a Masters of Scale fan too, then you'll likely remember episode 18 from season 2 entitled How to Build Your Company to Last, in which Reid celebrated a different animal, not startup unicorns, but the legacy Phoenix, 100-plus year companies that have stood the test of time. The first story featured in the episode was about the company Radio Flyer. You know, red wagons. One of the key leaders behind Radio Flyer's Phoenix-like sustainability is Tom Schlegel, Chief Innovation Officer, who joins us today from Illinois. Tom, welcome to a Sherpa's Guide to Innovation podcast.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you guys.
Outstanding. Thanks for joining us. Well, it's a privilege to speak with you today. Let's pause for a brief reminder for our listeners. Click that subscribe button on your podcast app and then share this episode with your network on social media. You can also check us out on the Health Podcast Network, a new network of podcasts focused on programming related to the transformation of healthcare. And you can learn more at healthpodcastnetwork.com and follow the Health Podcast Network Twitter account at healthpodnet. And speaking of Twitter, a Sherpa's Guide to Innovation also has a Twitter account, so follow us at SherpaPod. We'll include those links in the show notes. Unpause and back to live action. Are you ready for some questions, Tom?
Yeah, let's go.
Terrific. All right, here's the first one. Fill in the blank. I wanted to be a blank when I grew up. Now I'm a blank, and they both blank.
All right. Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a product planner at Ford Motor Company. So I grew up in Dearborn, Michigan, and that was my dream, to be the person who figured out what the next Mustang was going to be. And someone told me that's a product planner. So I was like, all right, I want to be a product planner at Ford. And now I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Radio Flyer. And the thing that they both have in common is that it's both helping to determine what the next product is or what the product that you're going to meet the market is. And it just happens that they both have wheels. Yeah, that's where I am now.
That is a very specific thing that you wanted to be growing up. But I guess if you're growing up in Dearborn, Michigan, that is probably not as unusual as it might sound.
Yeah, it was definitely Ford country. So my high school was named Edsel Ford after Henry Ford's first son. Our mascot for our football team was the Thunderbirds, named after the car that was introduced the same year that the high school was built. You know, everything in the town, the library was Henry Ford, the shopping center was named after the Henry Ford. So really, Henry Ford kind of built my town. And so all of my neighbors were clay modelers at Ford or worked in the service centers or somehow had something related to the auto industry. And so that was kind of my upbringing. And I always had a passion for cars and automobiles. And then that extended into product.
Terrific. Well, you'd approve of the fact that my parents, when they were younger, drove a Thunderbird, and the first car I purchased myself when I had a real job was a Ford Thunderbird.
Huh. Well, that's great.
That's awesome. Well, Tom, tell us a little bit more about your career arc. If people looked at your LinkedIn profile, they'd see that you have engineering degrees and a business development background, but what are some things about your career that we may not be able to find on your LinkedIn profile?
Well, you know, I guess my journey started when I was in college. So when I was a sophomore at the University of Notre Dame, I was a mechanical engineering student. And I was struggling with just tying that degree to what I wanted to do, which was develop new products. And I was getting bogged down in some of the thermodynamics and fluid dynamics and all these real technical classes that I was just kind of bored with. My roommate at the time was a graphic designer, and I went to meet him one day at the art building, and I remember seeing this cabinet where they had these garden tools. and there was products, and over the top of it, it said industrial design. And I'd never heard that term before. I said, well, what's industrial design? And people said, well, it's product design. And I said, well, that's what I want to do. Why am I in the engineering college? I want to do product design. And after asking around, I found out that Notre Dame had a very unique program where you could pick any major in the College of Arts and Letters, of which industrial design was one, and any major in the engineering college. You combine them into a 5-year program where you could get 2 bachelor degrees. So it wasn't a dual major, it was 2 separate bachelor degrees. And it was typically people would do like theology and electrical engineering, or English or philosophy and civil engineering. And so doing the art and science of product development seemed to make a lot of sense to me, but nobody really did that combination before. One person had done it maybe 4 or 5 years before me. And so since then, a lot of people do that combination program. That still exists, but that allowed me to really flex my creativity and product design skills along with the engineering skills. I could kind of do the math, so I thought I should keep going with the engineering degree. I didn't want to just switch over to industrial design, but that degree really kind of set me on that path.
So you've been in toys for a lot of your career, and you talked about you grew up in Ford country and you wanted to be into cars. So how'd you get into toys, and how did that stick?
Sure. Well, after college, I took a job at a factory manufacturing facility, because growing up in Detroit, and it was all about manufacturing, I thought I'll be a better designer if I have some manufacturing background. And so after that, I realized I was getting too far away from design and my passion. And so I took a job as an engineer at a company that made Happy Meal toys for McDonald's. And so I thought, well, this is a perfect blend. I'm not really technical enough to be like a real engineer at like Boeing, and I'm not really artistic enough to be like a car designer, but toys, that's my speed. I can do toys. It kind of combines, just the art and science of product development. And so I was at that company making Happy Meal toys for about 10 years. And towards the end of my time there, as I just grew and developed my management skills there, I ended up actually selling those kind of product development services that we were doing for McDonald's. We were developing Happy Meal toys at a very fast rate, and it's a very small product with limited parts, but it's a very small price point that you're trying to hit too. It's just as complex as designing a bigger problem. It's just different challenges. But I was selling those services to other customers like Hasbro or Ohio Art or General Mills, doing serial impact toys. That's where the business development side came.
And that is what eventually brought you to Radio Flyer, correct?
Yeah, it is. So Robert Passon, the chief wagon officer, so he also went to Notre Dame, and he was looking for someone to lead product development, and he kind of did a search within the Notre Dame database of engineers that graduated between certain years, and he found that there was this engineer in Chicago who was working on toys, and he thought, well, I should call him, and he called and left the message. And I said, well, I don't really, I'm happy in my job. I don't want to leave my job, but I'd be happy to do your product development for you, because that's what we do. We're doing this for the toy companies now. And he said, no, I'm looking for someone to lead product development. As I thought about it over the weekend, I thought, wow, here's this American icon brand that, I could really make an impact to if I could bring just my product development experience to develop a lot of new products for them. And then I continued the conversation with Robert. I ended up joining Radio Flyer, and I've been here for 16 years, started in product development, and then recently took over responsibility for sales and marketing also.
Wow. Storied history. And that's a much better story than Jay and I were joking. We were looking over your LinkedIn profile like, wow, this guy loves toys. He's just like a big kid. Like Peter Pan, doesn't want to grow up.
Yeah, my kids weren't too happy when I told them that we weren't going to be getting the Happy Meal toys, a couple months earlier than all of the neighbors. But then when they saw me come home with like the first, big wheel kind of style tricycle, they thought, wow, this is really cool. So I won them over, bringing home some pretty cool prototypes.
Yeah, I'll bet there's a lot of cool stuff in your house.
Oh, yeah.
And we also understand that you have a TED Talk that you did several years ago.
Yeah, so TED put out a call. My boss and I had been going to the TED conference for a couple of years, and they put out kind of a request for talks at what they called TED University at the time. It was kind of a side stage. It was still like 1,000 people coming, to the stage, and so I submitted a proposal for a talk on why failure should always be an option. And I was selected out of like 250 talks or whatever. There ended up being about 50 talks. So I had a 3-minute talk on why failure should always be an option. So it was fun. It's hard. It's hard to do a 3-minute talk. That's even harder sometimes than like a 45-minute presentation.
That is a short TED Talk. Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Tom, can you tell our audience a little bit more about Radio Flyer, its history, the kind of organization it is, and provide some context for today's conversation?
Sure. Well, Radio Flyer is a 102-year-old family company here in Chicago. It was started by Antonio Passon. It really started with a wood wagon. So he was a cabinet maker, woodworker, and it's kind of that classic immigrant story where he came over from Italy with really nothing and just relied on his skills as a woodworker and cabinet maker. And then as he made this wood wagon to haul tools around in the workshop, he ended up, using that to carry these Victrola cabinets, and people ended up buying more of the wagons than they did the cabinets. So like any good entrepreneur, he shifted focus and started selling wagons. And so it started with wood wagons and then transitioned to steel wagons when he noticed just the manufacturing lines of the auto industry and the steel stamping process that was going on, that he could get a wagon for every boy and every girl if he could reduce the price by switching to this stamped steel body instead of the wood body, which was just more complicated to make. And so that's the classic Little Red Wagon that everybody knows was really brought from that innovation of shifting from wood to steel.
Wow, and thinking about how that really opened up the market for it.
Yeah. And so, being able to do the steel and wood wagons for so many years, that became a big part of the company's business. And as a steel stamping manufacturer, then the company, which was called Radio Steel Company at the time, would make wheelbarrows and other things out of steel. It was kind of, what can we make out of steel? But as the company transitioned from a steel stamping manufacturer to really a consumer products company, well, we don't really know what the next material or technology is going to be. So as consumer preferences and wagons shifted from steel to plastic, we didn't have a rotomolding facility here. We didn't have plastics here. So the company really had to transform from a manufacturer to really a customer-focused company, which was, well, what does the customer need? And then how do we create it? And really focusing on design and marketing and outsourcing the manufacturing to the experts. And so for plastic wagons, for example, the expert was a rotomolder in the U.S. in another state that, we partnered with to create a plastic wagon. So when we would present plastic wagons to the retail buyers, they would say, well, no, Radio Flyers are steel and wood wagon guy. We're gonna go with the Little Tykes or the Step 2 plastic wagon. And that was true until we came out with a plastic wagon that had all the features that mom and dad really wanted. And then once we did that, then the Radio Flyer plastic wagon became the best-selling wagon in the world. And so that's, as the company has evolved, that's what we've learned. A lot of people will put restrictions on the brand or on the company, but if we get the product right and we stay focused on the consumer, then we can win. And people want the Radio Flyer brand because they know it as reliable, durable products that last long.
And I think that evolution of Radio Flyer is part of the real meat of the story that I think is going to be so interesting for this conversation. And we were actually connected to you through Karen Dillon, who is a colleague of Clay Christensen. And as our listeners know, we're big fans, and a lot of our episodes center around that. And she came to know you through a presentation that you gave, I believe, at the Tugboat Institute, and was really fascinated by your story of disruptive innovation. So talk to us about how you became acquainted with Clay's theories, and then how you actually saw the theory of disruptive innovation play out, and you were able to really apply that in the evolution of Radio Flyer.
Sure. Yeah, I first read The Innovators Dilemma several years ago. I can't remember when I read it, but it was before coming to Radio Flyer. And so I just found it fascinating how these leading companies were getting disrupted by these upstarts or these entrants with the product that was, on the face of it inferior, but was somehow tied closer to what the customer was looking for. And that, these larger companies were just caught kind of unawares. And then by the time they figured it out, it was too late. And, as I was starting at Radio Flyer, there was this little video camera called the Flip video camera. I don't know if you guys remember that. Do you remember the Flip video camera?
You'd hold it in one hand and you can move the screen around so it could be like facing forward or facing backward.
Yeah.
So if you were filming yourself, you could flip it around and you could see yourself.
Had like a high 8mm film or whatever, and they had really great quality. It was Sony. It was all the big names, and they were getting more and more complicated, and they were maybe $1,000. And Flip video camera was this thing that had a little USB port that would just pop out the side of it, and you could just plug it into a laptop or a desktop computer. This is 2000, 2001, 2003, yep. And the quality of the video wasn't as good. It was 640 by 480, and it wasn't as good as the Sony, but it was just so much easier to transfer the video that it became the number one selling video camera on Amazon. And so Amazon was selling all these, video cameras, and it wasn't as good. And then as they innovated, they got high definition, quality video. They got, better and better video. And so I would share those examples with our team, just saying, we need to be aware of this idea of being disrupted. And the first time we saw it on our business was right around the time when I started. There was this tricycle. So at the time, most tricycles were made in China, and they were what we call knocked down in a box. So you would get the box, and there would be parts in the box, and it's every parent's, most dreaded words of some assembly required. And you'd have to, put this thing together. And so there was this tricycle that folded up that was, by U.S. consumer standards, it was kind of ugly, but it folded up, and our customer, the retail customer, would say, well, this is selling pretty well, and it's great because you can fold it up and take it to grandma's house. And as we were looking at it, we're like, I'm not sure if that's the main reason why it's selling so well, but it had a smaller front wheel. It was small, like it wasn't as good of a product as our classic tricycle that we were selling. That was one of the top selling tricycles. But we thought, I wonder if this is going to disrupt us. And as we started looking at it, we decided, well, we could do a folding trike, but we would come up with our own patented folding mechanism, but ours wouldn't fold up as much because we identified the benefit isn't that it folds up so you can take it to grandma's as much as just the fact that it's fully assembled and it's on the shelf, and that consumers really don't like assembling products. And if they can get it kind of fully assembled, then that would be great. But the competitive one we saw, when it folded up more compactly, but you had to pack them out one next to another, and so that the box, when it was shipping from overseas, would be bigger. So, for example, let's say they would only get 600 pieces on a container, so their freight cost would be double if it was knocked down in a box. And so what we determined is we could nest two products. If we didn't have it fold up as close, we could nest them in such a way and ship a two-pack that we could ship a fully assembled product at basically the same kind of freight cost of a product that was knocked down and the customer had to assemble. So being able to deliver a fully assembled tricycle at the same kind of cost of freight of an unassembled tricycle was a big, benefit to the consumer. And we were able to kind of protect our trike business, and that actually became our best-selling tricycle, which was a smaller tricycle with a smaller front wheel with not as many bells and features as the classic tricycle, but it was more convenient, and it was solving a problem that customers had. So that was kind of the first, example of kind of where we thought we were being disrupted, and just recognizing that and then, attacking it as quickly as we could.
And you talked about the plastic wagons earlier. Was that another example of being able to use the theory to adjust to something that was, I don't know if a completely different business model, but someone really coming in at the bottom of a market that is not as good as what the incumbent's producing? Yeah,
that was a much bigger threat to our business because it was at the core of our business. But, when I started at Radio Flyer, it was just going through this transformation of where we were selling more plastic wagons than steel and wood. So the consumer preference has changed from steel and wood to plastic wagons. At that time, we were kind of late to the plastic wagon business. Other people had created plastic wagons, but once we did it, it was great. And so once we got the product right, we became the leader in plastic wagons. And then for the next several years, we did sustaining innovations, adding things like extra storage, adding cup holders, adding seat belts, adding a canopy. And as we added these features, if mom was willing to pay for it, then it would be a success. And if she wasn't, it wasn't. Sun protection turned out to be a huge innovation that everybody wanted. So all the plastic wagons, or most of them that we were selling, had these canopies on them. And then we saw this folding wagon at like the warehouse clubs, and it was made out of like steel and fabric, and it kind of folded up, and it had these big crisscross bars on the side of it. And it wasn't really marketed to kids. It was sold as a utility wagon. And so we saw it, and we thought, well, not really concerned, because they're not selling at our current customers. It's not at Toys R Us. It's not at Walmart or Target. But then we started seeing posts on social media, and we started seeing kids in these wagons on Facebook and on Instagram. And then we thought, well, if Clayton Christensen is right, these guys are going to start to move up market, and they're going to start to eat away at our business. So we really started to focus on this. We did some in-home ethnographic research where we took these utility wagons to the people's homes, and often we recruited people who had one. And we would ask them all about the wagon. And then at the end of the interview, after an hour, we would say, do you see that little yellow sticker there that says it's not safe for kids? And they would say, oh, no, I didn't see that, but it's okay. It's deep enough. They're not going to fall out. But those wagons weren't marketed to kids because they weren't designed to pass the toy standards. They had pinch points. They had small parts that would be released. They failed the toy standard in 4 or 5 different areas. And so it was a classic disruptive situation where it was a worse product. It was not the current customers. It was a lower cost and lower profits. And so, and the entrant was winning. So what we did is we just felt, well, we don't want to go down and compete with that. The Radio Flyer brand needs to be safe for kids. People are going to expect that. So what we did is we created a whole new folding mechanism that instead of these crisscross bars on the side, it put it all underneath the wagon. And by doing that, we were able to create a new feature where we could zip down the side of the wagon to convert the wagon into a bench. And so we came out with basically a sustaining innovation over that disruptive folding utility wagon by creating a kid-safe wagon that we could sell at Toys R Us, we could sell in the toy department at Walmart and Target. And we had this extra feature where we could add seat belts because we could market it to kids, and we could design it so it was safe for kids. And it became a huge success. And then we were able to extend that by adding a canopy to that. And so we intercepted kind of their trajectory and got in just in time because we recognized we were being disrupted. And I think that was huge.
And I think that's the important thing, is you recognized it, because what Clay's theory says, what it's easy to fall into the trap as an incumbent is you dismiss the threat. So Radio Flyer could have very easily said, these are plastic wagons. These aren't as good as what we make. They're not even toys. People shouldn't use them that way. And I think the lesson here is in your chief wagon officer's career, but you become much more consumer oriented, and you actually went into the consumer's home. You did the ethnography, and you learned how they used it. So you started really listening to the customers, and it seems like that was how you were able to stave off the disruptor.
That's exactly right. And it's so easy to dismiss it because there's no seats. Every wagon we sold after that, it had to have seats. There's no seat belts. There's no cup holders. There's no sun protection. There's no extra storage. There's nothing that the consumers are telling us that they want in a wagon, and yet they're selling a lot of them, and people are using them in this circumstance or this situation. And so, it's so easy to dismiss it if you don't dig deep, but you have to dig deep.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And then, we extended it further. A couple summers ago, I sent an email out to the whole company, and I said, as you're going to sporting events and things for your kid this summer, take a photo of any competitive folding wagon or Radio Flyer, any folding wagons that you see, take a photo and email it to, this email address that was an internal email address. We got 275 pictures. So we printed out all the pictures and we start posting them up on the wall, and we start to see these clusters of these different themes. And this is where we start to pull some of the jobs to be done theory in, because you look at, well, what is the job that people are hiring this utility wagon or this folding wagon? What progress in their life are they trying to, get done? And what we noticed and what we saw is that a lot of them, there was a cooler in the wagon taking up half the wagon, and there was camping chairs and things. There was no room for a kid in the wagon anyway. And they had baseball bags and all kinds of different things. And you start to clump it, theme it, and that led to the latest innovation that we launched last summer, which was the tailgater wagon, which is this folding wagon that we have, but with this fold-down tailgate feature where you can put a cooler and 3 bag chairs and strap it all in, and it's just kind of on the back of the wagon, so then you still have room for the kids inside the wagon if that's what you want, or you could put more stuff in the wagon if you wanted. So we continue to use both the disruptive innovation theories and the jobs to be done as we look at continuing to evolve and innovate the wagon, because we just have to stay close to our consumer and what they need in the products.
Well, it's no wonder that Radio Flyer was profiled on Masters of Scale as a phoenix, able to exist and compete and succeed, more than 100 years. And it's easy to see that as an organization, you've been unafraid to disrupt yourself in a variety of ways. Could you talk about some of the ways that the company, you mentioned a few already about, moving away from manufacturing and more towards being a consumer company and outsourcing some of the manufacturing pieces. But could you talk to us more about, particularly as you have responded to these potential entrants, how have you changed your internal processes, structures, org structures to respond to those things? Was there anything that you did to your business model to change how you were responding to these disruptive threats?
I think the biggest thing was just the introduction of research into the product development process, because when I started, it was a very, limited view of, well, what's in the mass market, what's selling well, what's not selling well, what should we do? And when you focus on just the customers, the retail customer and the competitors, you tend to develop products that look very similar to the stuff that's on the shelf. And so I think having and some people will call it design thinking, or I view it more as just a consumer focused approach, where finding out what they really need. And that's the way you're going to come out with something new and different. Even just when I was driving to work this morning, I saw this van and it said 2 guys and a van. And it was clearly a knockoff of 2 Men in a Truck. It's a moving company. Yeah. It was like 2 Men in a Truck, and that's been around for a number of years. This was 2 guys and a van. All they did was just change a couple words in the name of it. Like, that has no interest for me of developing a business where you're just copying kind of what's out there and just changing it. That's not the way you build an enduring business. I've always approached it as trying to figure out, well, what are the white space? What's the new thing? What's different? How can we, be relevant to just keep the innovation going? So the innovation and the new to the world stuff is the stuff that really drives me and excites me. And it's really just that passion for product that I think I've brought to Radio Flyer, and that we've instilled within our group, that is so exciting for people, and they get jazzed and excited about it too.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned jobs to be done earlier. We're a big fan of that, and it sounds like you're really employing that lens as you do your research and develop product. As part of that, you're probably familiar with the concept of a purpose brand that Dr. Christensen articulates. I guess my question is, are you consciously developing a purpose brand at Radio Flyer, and how would you characterize what that brand means to the consumer?
Sure. Well, when we talk to people about Radio Flyer, most people, the first thing they do if they grew up in this country, they smile. And then the second thing they do is tell you a story. And it's usually a story about their childhood, their memory with the radio flyer. And I think there's a really strong emotional bond that people have with the brand. And it's often because usually people were interacting with our brand in a situation where you were being taken by someone you love to something fun. So you were being pulled by a grandparent to a park, or you were being pulled by a parent to go, on an adventure. And so, we really think that we're on a mission to kind of bring smiles to kids of all ages. And there's a multi-generational nature to our brand where grandparents and parents and kids all interact with our brand that's different than other products, where often the product is just played with by the child by themselves. But our products, whether it's a tricycle that has a push bar that feels more like a stroller, or a wagon where there's a pull handle where a parent is pulling a child, there's a lot of parent, child or grandparent-child interactions with our brand, and it's all about, love and engagement. And so we want to kind of keep that going with our products and make sure that the products last a long time and last, through all of the children in your family. I have 4 boys, and so the products when I got from my oldest, I want them to last until the youngest comes along.
Yeah, I mean, I do. It was a loaded question because I think it's clear that you do have a purpose brand, and I tested that this morning before I went to work. I should have asked my wife about this before she was about to walk out the door. I actually sent you a picture of the radio flyer wagon that's in our garage, and we don't have kids. We have a radio flyer wagon, and we bought it a while back, but I can't remember the details. So I asked my wife, Dee Dee, what she remembers about it, and she said, well, I needed something to haul plants around with, and I needed a little red wagon. And my antenna comes up, and I do jobs to be done, mode, and I channel the inner Bob Mesta to do questions, and I hone in on, wait, why do you need a little red wagon? You don't need that to haul plants around. And we talked more, and she and I, neither of us actually had a radio flyer wagon growing up, so she didn't have one, but she articulated to me that I never had a reason to own one, but I wanted a reason to own one. So here later in life, to haul plants around, she got a radio flyer wagon because she always wanted to have one. And I just think it's a fascinating study and jobs to be done where it's not just about the functionality of a product. It's very much about the emotional connection of it, because we could have any number of things to cart plants around, but she wanted a little red wagon.
Yeah, that's great. I love hearing stories like that. That's awesome.
You probably hear tons of them.
I could add more with my 4 boys. I mean, we have one at home as well, and one of my sons, he's kind of the maniac of the crew. He just loves speed. He does life at full speed, and so even this past week, kids were in the wagon, and I'm sprinting down the road with these kids, just laughing. And I mean, those are the memories as a dad that you treasure forever. So you're absolutely right about the emotional and maybe even the social component of the experience with your child or with your parent, or so that it's a group experience, not just as you were saying, Tom, a toy that you play with by yourself. It's a social, cultural experience.
Yeah, and just like Bob Mesta talks about the dining room table and the example that he shared about how that was where people were making memories, and it was hard for people to move out of their family home into a condo, maybe where to put the dining room table, because that was where all the Christmas dinners and Thanksgiving dinners and the memories were. I think in a similar way, the wagon is kind of that outdoor vehicle of those memories. You remember going to the zoo, with your parent or your grandparent, or you remember these moments of these family reunions where the wagon was there. It's kind of always there. It's the backdrop. It's the home base. So there's some interesting connections there.
Yeah. So to kind of bring things to a close, maybe one last question. of how you continue to foster a culture of innovation and build upon what you've done, and just where do you see it going? What do we expect from Radio Flyer in the future?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's really the passion for products. I love new products. I mean, I'm the guy who sees if I see a competitor product, I buy it, and we have a large collection of competitive products here. But even in other product categories, if I see Kleenex has a new box or whatever, I'll bring it in and share it with the marketing team. Or if I see Windex has a new spray bottle mechanism, I'll bring it in and share it, with the designers or the engineers, or some new coffee mug that has a new non-spill top or something. But also just sharing the different theories on innovation. When I read an article or I read a book or something, I'll share that with the team just to get people talking about it. So when I hear a new designer saying, well, what job is Mom hiring this wagon to do? I think, okay, great, I'm making an impact. So, but then it's really just a lot of the research that we do. We have an indoor play lab here at Radio Flyer. We're able to bring kids and parents in and observe them using products. So the culture of innovation just comes from making sure that we're all immersed in our category, in our products, our retail customers, our consumers, their lives, the in-home ethnographic research, the kind of one-on-one interviews that we do with people. That's really breeds us thinking differently to do different stuff, like creating the first lithium-ion battery-powered car for kids. That was a huge step for Radio Flyer to take that risk and that leap to really go into a whole new category with a whole new technology. And that's fun. That's exciting. People want to work here because we take risks and projects like that on because it's fun and exciting.
Yeah, I mean, if our listeners if you've never been on the Radio Flyer website and look at the array of products, and I don't know if the battery powered car you're talking about is the Tesla, but going into this, I didn't realize Radio Flyer built a Tesla.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That is tremendous, and I know that I said that was a closing question, but also want to point out to the listeners that. And you could elaborate on Radio Flyer. This culture of innovation has really spilled into how engaged the employees are, and it's one of the very best places to work in America, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we get the Best Places to Work award from a number of different groups, whether it's the Great Places to Work organization or the Best Places to Work in Illinois, or even Fortune magazine named us a couple of years ago the top small workplace. So it's this startup kind of culture that we have here where everyone's very collaborative and engaged and focused on the mission of bringing smiles to kids of all ages and creating warm memories that last a lifetime that allows us all to just be moving in the same direction. And it's a great place to work, to have that 102-year history, yet feel like a startup.
Yeah, it's a fascinating organization. I've learned a lot over the past week or so preparing for this, and we'll include some good information and some really incredible videos in our show notes for the listeners.
Yeah, I particularly love the short video, the flying.
Taking flight.
Yeah, taking flight. Yeah, that's as a father, that's a great one.
Yeah, wasn't that fun? And we actually won an Emmy for that, a daytime Emmy for that short, Taking Flight.
Yeah.
It really kind of encapsulates the Radio Flyer brand.
Yeah, amazing.
Well, Tom, this has been a real treat. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on innovation and how you apply it at Radio Flyer, and for helping to create smiles and warm memories for me and my kids and millions of others as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun.
Outstanding. Well, this is Ben Tingy and Jay Gerhardt signing off with the Sherpa's Guide to Innovation podcast. Thanks for listening.
This is so appropriate before the 4th of July because this is like quintessential American company. This it feels like a patriotic episode.
Well, if you go by a 4th of July parade, you'll see radio flyers everywhere, and they'll jump out at you even more now that you've talked to me.